You are a partner in Skyline Commercial Real Estate, veteran of real estate development, acquisitions, property management. You currently have 470,000 square feet of commercial real estate that's owned or managed.
You know, one thing about real estate is it's a game of patience. You know, it's not an overnight thing. You have to build it slowly. You have to learn how to raise capital, and you have to learn how to strike when the iron's hot, but not be greedy. You know, purchase price is always important. Everyone wants to sell their property for top dollar, but the terms are equally, as if not more important in some cases. For example, I can pay you $1 billion for your company if I can pay you over 1 billion years.
John, thank you for taking the time.
You got it. Pleasure to be here, Raj.
You are a partner in Skyline Commercial Real Estate, veteran of real estate development, acquisitions, property management. You currently have 470,000 square feet of commercial real estate that's owned or managed. And you also make time to be a pilot.
That's right. You nailed it.
Can you give me some background on how you grew up, where you grew up? Because I think you have an incredible story and also an incredible way that you think about life and business. So I'd be curious to hear how that was shaped and formed.
Sure. Well, I grew up in Chesterfield, and I was one of three. I was the oldest of three. And my mom, long story short, she was a stay-at-home mom. And my father worked for a big company, Monsanto. I'm sure most people have heard of Monsanto. And my parents were both very hard workers. And I just really learned the value of hard work at a young age. My mom, when I was probably in third or fourth grade, she had started a book fair company. So she was a librarian, library background, degree in library science. And she's always loved books. And so she started a book fair company probably around when I was in third grade. And I learned the value of what it's like to run a small business at a young age. And so I was my mom's helper. She probably did, 20 or so, maybe 22 book fairs at local Catholic schools, primarily private schools around the St. Louis area. And I was the helper that she operated out of our basement when she started out. And I always remember the nights before she had book fairs, I would help her load the van to get set up, and sometimes helped her set up and take down. And I loaded all the boxes of books on a trailer, pulled behind the tractor, and I drove the tractor from our basement door up to her driveway and loaded up the van. And so I really learned kind of those principles and what it was like, and as far as hard work to run a small business at a pretty young age.
That's a really cool story. You said around 20-ish book fairs a year, and I understand that's a small business, but that sounds like a lot of work. A book fair, I would imagine, takes a lot of time to set up, and then beyond the setup to run and then take down or deassemble, the setup, whatever it looks like. With those book fairs, was that really a passion project for your mother, or was that something that helped to really pay the bills at home?
I think it was a little bit of both. It probably paid fewer bills than they would have liked it to. But, she learned a lot. I remember a lot of times she was up, probably close to all night getting ready for the, the book fair the next day. And while she was, a mom with 3 kids at a young age, it's very admirable. Not many people can do it.
And your first business was not in books or real estate. It was lawn care, correct?
That's right. You got it.
And was that in high school or college that you started the lawn care company?
Well, it was a little bit of both. So long story short is, so I started cutting grass when I was probably a freshman in high school, a little bit before I could drive, actually. So, my first year of my little landscaping business, my mom or dad would drive me to the different lawns around the Chesterfield area to cut, and I probably, started cutting 3 or 4 a week. I always appreciated them always believing me, in me at a pretty young age in high school. But so I started cutting grass, and then eventually got my driver's license. So I was free to go out and, support myself a little bit more as far as being able to buy a trailer and a truck and, the lawnmowers and cutting whatever lawns I wanted to and not being dependent on my parents. So what I did was I wanted to, cut lawns within one specific geographic location in wealthier areas in St. Louis for a couple of reasons. One is I thought I could probably make a little bit more money there, cutting lawns with nicer homes. And two is I wanted to learn about how, wealthy individuals did it. Did they have a business? Did they have real estate? What was the key to their success? So, I was the high school kid that went out and I put my little business cards that I printed off myself in mailboxes, and people would call me, and then I'd knock on the neighbor's, door next to their house, and they would hire me and try to get as many lawns as I could within, smaller geographic area in more well-to-do areas in St. Louis.
And did you find that a lot of those folks were pretty generous in sharing knowledge or wisdom with you if you had questions for them?
I did, yeah, for the most part. And what I learned, I guess in high school, I ran this landscaping business all through high school and then my freshman year in college. And I went to St. Louis University, so I was local. And at that time, I was probably cutting between 35 and 40 lawns a week. So for a full-time student, it was a lot of work. But I found that most of my customers, the lion's share of my customers in these wealthy areas, they were somehow connected to real estate, whether they had an operating company and, invested in real estate passively, or they were full-time real estate, whether it was a developer or they had a holding company. Learned that a lot of wealthy people create and grow their wealth through real estate.
Got it. And that's kind of like your first true experience in the world of real estate was learning from those folks, right? Or at least the world of real estate investing?
That's right.
When you were in college, I'm sure that was a big kind of paradigm or mindset shift for you. So what were you studying? And if that wasn't real estate related, was that exposure to real estate the reason why you eventually got into real estate?
Yeah. So I actually made a decision to not continue college. So I dropped out of college, never finished my senior year, which we could talk about. That's probably one of the best decisions I ever made in my life. But I probably started out in real estate, with a passion for real estate, reading the same books that you probably did, your Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and, difference between an asset liability, and kind of committed myself to, rather than, working every single day for a paycheck, i.e. cutting grass, I wanted to figure out a way to build assets. So I was working on a degree in business management and entrepreneurship at SLU. So pretty much in line with what I thought I wanted to do. But I had this unique opportunity to get involved in real estate when I was a sophomore in college, and ended up running with it and making a decision that I'm going to take this opportunity rather than finish out my college years. So my best friend's dad was a doctor, and he grew up in South St. Louis, and he wanted to be part of a group that made old homes look beautiful again. And so long story short, he was my first money guy. And so I made a decision to exit the lawn care company, which my dad actually ended up taking over. He was kind of tired of the corporate world and was looking for a change. So he took over my lawn care company and bought one at the same time. So he had a little bit of a career change at the same time when I did. So we, I was the college kid with a lot of ambition and a lot of drive. And I had a money guy who I trusted, and he trusted me. And so went out and bought some shells in South St. Louis and your Benton Park kind of Seward neighborhoods, and just learned through the school of hard knocks how not to make the same mistake twice. And I remember, a lot of really hot summers. I was out there gutting these, homes in South City, swinging hammers, and really tried to learn from the ground up how to renovate a home. And then kind of along the way, we probably did 30, 35 homes together, which were all speculative. I thought, well, these homes, they're 100, 130 years old in these South City neighborhoods. And even if they have new guts, if you call it guts, maybe It has new plumbing. It has, new HVAC, all new systems, looks beautiful. But at the end of the day, it's still an old home. So I thought, well, why don't we try to build a brand new home that we can warranty, that someone can come in and completely customize from the ground up. So with my money guy, we started building, one spec home, two spec homes, and then two at a time, three at a time in those historic areas that were completely custom from the ground up. So they blended in with the historic streetscapes. Sometimes you wouldn't even know that it was a new home because it blended in so well. And these South City neighborhoods are very careful as far as who they let build new homes. And there's a process you have to go through. And, the windows have to be the exact, right dimensions. You have to base your design on a model example that exists within the neighborhood already. So that was kind of my entry into the custom home building world. And then, we probably built, along the way, I went off on my own and fortunately didn't need my kind of doctor money guy anymore. And so started building homes on my own, a lot of stuff in South St. Louis, Lafayette Square, Soulard. I probably ended up building, 30, 40 homes down there, brand new homes. And then we did some custom homes in Ladue and Frontenac and other parts of St. Louis County.
For context, when you started rehabbing homes in South City, around what year was that, or what time period?
That was probably 2005 or so, maybe 2004.
And then that switch to new development, was that around 09, 10, somewhere around there?
Probably around there. Probably closer to 2007, 2008.
Okay.
Right before the
How did
Great Recession.
the GFC impact your business at that time, or some of your developments?
Well, so we started out building specs. So most people know what specs are, but that's when you build a home and you find the buyer after it's built and hope they can pay, the price that you want. So there's a lot of risks associated with that, a lot of borrowed money, and a lot of, hence the name, speculation. So what I did around the time when I went off on my own is I would go out and I'd find the lots. I'd take down the lots, acquire the lots in these, historic neighborhoods in South St. Louis, and I'd pre-market them. So I'd buy the lot and I'd wait for the buyer to come, and then I would go through kind of the design, the bid, and the build process with the buyer. So it was a way to take the risk off of me, the builder, and shuffle it over to the customer. So I was actually able to acquire a lot of lots very inexpensively during the Great Financial Crisis. Fortunately, and in a lot of times, we made more money on selling the lot to the customer than the fee to build the home.
I'm sure with you seeing those types of opportunities post GFC, that's really kind of found its way into your mindset in terms of your ability to be patient in more recent years and your ability to kind of wait for the right deal to fall into your lap versus being overly aggressive. Would you agree with that experience?
Oh, absolutely. Helped? Yeah. So I'm fortunate that I really learned a lot about what not to do during the Great Recession, and in terms of borrowing money and managing risk. Because as a real estate investor, really your number one obligation is to manage risk. So learned a lot more about what not to do than what to do.
Sure, that makes a lot of sense. With the rehabs, were you utilizing any historic tax credits or anything along those lines at that time, or were they available?
Well, there were neighborhood preservation credits, kind of similar, but we never really did any tax credits. It was all just kind of market rate flips.
And similar thing with the new developments, no incentives?
The main incentives were like neighborhood tax credits. There were some of those, and then tax abatements back in the day when you could really get 5 to 10 year tax abatements for new homes and rehabs.
Got it. The new developments in those neighborhoods, like you mentioned, Benton Park and Soulard, were you a pioneer in doing so at that time? I wasn't in St. Louis. I moved here in 2013, so I've only seen these neighborhoods in more recent years, but I've heard from others that there were time periods where, you might go a decade without seeing new construction in some of these places. So were you on the forefront of some of that at that time?
Well, I think I was part of it, but not all of it. There are quite a few people who, built custom homes in South City neighborhoods before me. But I know I built the most homes in Lafayette Square. We probably did around at least 20 homes in Lafayette Square, which is, one of the top neighborhoods in South City. But had a great experience doing it. A lot of kind of transplants from St. Louis County who, they're coming from a, fairly affluent area with a big, nice house, but they wanted to move to the city for a little bit more of a walkable lifestyle. For example, they wanted a yard, but not a big yard. And they wanted a house equally to or nicer than the one they came from in West County. So a lot of county transplants who wanted that lifestyle.
That makes a lot of sense. And Lafayette Square is a truly beautiful neighborhood. So when you went to West County with your new construction, custom home development company, that's ultimately where you decided to stop and no longer do custom homes, correct?
Correct for the most part, yeah. We were doing, custom homes in Lafayette Square at the same time that we were doing them in the county, but yes.
Can you speak to why you exited that side of your business and focused more on acquiring commercial real estate?
Yeah, so, building custom homes was really the perfect foundation for me, no pun intended, on getting involved in real estate. So it was a great education for me to learn the process, learn how to build a house, learn how to, work with customers at a higher level and work with architects and so forth. But, it really wasn't who I wanted to be when I grew up. I always talk about who I want to be when I grow up, even today, because things are always changing. But, from the time it takes to buy a lot, to find a customer, to hire an architect and go through the architectural process with that customer. And then finally you have the product you want to build, then you send it out to bid a few times and make a lot of changes. Then you get the permits, then you build the physical house. Then you warranty the house. And even though if your warranty is 1 or 2 years, the customer is going to call you for 5 years, it just became a poor use of my time per hour. And that was around the time when I started to get involved more in the investment side, which is where I knew I wanted to eventually be.
So the home building allowed you to build the capital to get into the investing side. And you said early on in the conversation that dropping out of college was a good decision for you. And is that because you were able to take advantage of that opportunity to start building new homes and gain that experience to get into the investment side?
Yeah, absolutely. I wouldn't have had the jump start that I had in real estate if it wasn't for this unique opportunity. So, like I said, it was probably one of the best decisions I made in my life. And, I think a lot about, whether I would advise my kids. I have 3 kids. I have an 11, an 8, and a 4. So I think all the time about, what am I going to tell them? We're living in a world today where, the days of, got to get into a good grade school so I can go a good high school so I can get into a good college and find a safe, secure, well-paying job and retire with that company and be safe, those are behind us. Not that they don't exist, but they're few and far between. So I always wanted to try to control my destiny rather than have a company do it for me.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense. So you've mentioned 3 kids, real estate investing, and then we know you're in brokerage and management. And you're a pilot. So it takes a lot to balance all of it. I know you use leverage in your life, whether it's debt for real estate, which you're conservative with, your team. So you have a team that's helping you achieve your business objectives. And then you're also using leverage in the form of other people's experience, mentors in your life. Can you kind of speak more to how you've gone about crafting the life that you want to live and, as you put it, try to become the person you want to be when you grow up?
Yeah, man, that's a great question. I really try to be a dad first. And it's easier said than done. There's no perfect, rule book to do that. But, you only have so many years with your kids when they're young. And I knew that I wanted to do everything I can to have as most time with them as possible, yet still be able to provide and run a company. One thing that I did that was very helpful to me is I was able to figure out a way to work 4 days a week instead of 5. So I don't work on Fridays. And when I say I don't work, I'm always available. I'm not physically going into the office. I'm typically not taking appointments, but I'm always accessible. I'm always on the emails. But, real estate has always been attractive to me because you can generate a huge amount of activity with very little staff. And fortunately, that's been the case for me. We have a great management team that supports everybody and the properties we manage and myself. And just very fortunate to be able to do that and invest time in my family and just try to really build my business around the family rather than my family around the business.
I'm trying to do the same. It's tough, as you know, when you're building a company and also, you have relatively young children. So for somebody that, let's say, has not been making family a priority, where do you think they could start? Maybe that 4-day work week is a little too difficult to do day one, but do you have any thoughts on where someone could start? Maybe it's waking up early, for example.
Yeah. So I've always been an early guy, an early riser. I wake up between 5 and 5:15. And those early hours of the day are precious for me to be able to clear my head and focus and, before the kids get up for the day. Another thing I realized is that I'm not quite as important as I think I am. There's always someone out there who can do your job better, or at least the same as you, usually better. And just try to use that mentality to understand that you can rely on good people to support you rather than feeling that you have to do everything yourself and the buck stops with you.
Would it be fair then to say that you really try to empower people on your team to make decisions and take control of, various responsibilities in your organization?
Absolutely. Relationships and people are everything. And the management of real estate assets is extremely important. It's very easy to see the difference between a well-managed property by people who care and show up and answer their phones versus the opposite. It's night and day in terms of, your tenant base and the financial performance of a property. You have to have good management. And we've worked very hard to hire people who do care and who can bring that value to the company and the properties that we own. Another thing I realize is that, don't know if you've heard of the 80-20 rule. I think a lot of people have, but about 80% of your results come from 20% of your activity. So I really do my best, and again, this is not a perfect science, to live in that 20%. What is that 20%? What are the activities that lie in that 20% that will generate 80% of the activities?
In your world, could that 20% be sourcing and negotiating the purchase price on a new deal? Would that be more along the lines of, what you're getting at there?
Absolutely. Kind of the team building side, the behind the scenes, and, just thanking your employees and your team for doing what they do. I like to be as out of the office as I can, meeting investors and, people who are in the business, or maybe it's meeting with a major tenant and just growing relationships and seeking opportunities.
When you say, meeting a major tenant, for example, I think your focus is office and retail, and correct me if I'm wrong. So in your world, what would a major tenant look like?
Yeah, so we own a lot of different property types. As our goal is to be as diversified as we can under the umbrella of real estate so that when things get bad, no one sector can completely take you down. So we own some neighborhood strip centers. We own more creative office buildings. We own some warehouse, more industrial complexes. We own Dollar General stores. So we try to really spread that risk out as much as we can. We used to own a lot of multifamily, which we've sold the majority of that. But another thing that I learned on the investment side is that it makes a lot more sense to keep the money in the deal. We see a lot of investors who rely on the properties for their paychecks. And what I've always tried to do is, treat each building and the portfolio as I call it a glorified 401k. So set it aside, manage it well, and pay down the debt as fast as you can rather than, leverage it up and rely on the buildings for the paychecks. And I rely on my, management fees and brokerage commissions as my quote paycheck, and really treat the properties right so that when we have our next recession, you're in a favorable position with the bank, and every day the bank owns less and less, and you own more and more.
That's a good way to go about it. When you say, having the property act as a glorified 401k, would that mean excess cash is being kept in a reserve account? That way you can take care of CapEx as it's needed, maybe improvements if you want to sell, and then additional cash is just kind of sitting there for a rainy day? Is that more or less the way you're thinking about it?
Yes and no. So you definitely have to have a reserve account for a rainy day, whether it's roof repairs, HVAC repairs, those big CapEx items. But all of the money over and above what we think our CapEx reserve should be, we pay down debt with it. And we pay down debt whether the interest rate is 3% or 10%. Hopefully we don't get quite to 10% anytime soon, Raj. But it's the principle of treating it like an investment and consistently taking the excess, if you're fortunate enough to have excess, and plowing down the debt.
Wow. I don't think I've ever heard of anyone employing that strategy. I'm sure people do, but I've just never personally heard that before. So when you're getting new debt on a new acquisition, are you specifically mentioning to or working with lenders that will allow you to pay down debt as you see fit over and above what they're expecting?
Yeah. So most of our debt is with local banks, usually bigger local banks. But that community bank relationship, typically they don't have any prepayment penalties. So we typically don't have any, big HUD loans that you see a lot of in the multifamily world, no CMBS loans that, have those defeasance and prepayment penalty provisions in it. So we make sure that we have the flexibility to be able to do that.
That makes sense. Another thing that is kind of unique, I think, to the way that you think and makes a lot of sense to me is for you when you're acquiring a new asset, the terms you say are as important as the purchase price. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Sure. Purchase price is always important. Everyone wants to sell their property for top dollar or their company for top dollar, but the terms are equally, as if not more important in some cases. For example, I can pay you $1 billion for your company if I can pay you over 1 billion years. So whether that involves some creative seller financing or maybe another means, terms are very important.
Aside from seller financing, are there any other terms or a type of structure that you may try to play with in order to win a deal or win a deal on your terms?
Sometimes we can get creative with, because we own the majority of our holdings, we can forego commissions. We can put commissions back into the deal and really work hard to keep our operating costs low, I think is a big part of it.
That makes a lot of sense. Would the retail center that we met at, Three Flags in St. Charles, which I think was a deal you bought around 2014-ish, is that right?
Yeah, maybe 2014, 2016, somewhere in there.
Okay.
Yeah.
So would that deal be an example of where you got a little creative on the acquisition, or can you kind of walk us through that deal? Because I think it was, number one, a phenomenal piece of real estate, but number two, the story behind what you did to add value, I think was incredible as well.
Yeah, so I love talking about this building because it's really a great case study for a number of different reasons. So call it the Three Flags building. It was a 60,000 square foot office retail center, 3 stories, first floor retail, floors 2 and 3 office. And it was owned by a family. Father had developed, was one of the pioneer developers in the city of St. Charles, right where you cross the river on Highway 70. And so the 4 kids owned it, and father was still around at that point in time. But 4 kids owned it. 3 were out of town and kind of saw it on their K-1 as a liability. And then they had 1 local brother who kind of operated the building. And we were able to purchase it off market at a very good price. We were able to pay, the family a good price based on what it was, but we knew where we could take it. And it was kind of your classic mismanaged office retail building. The signage was dated, communication was poor. I think maybe it was probably 80% occupied, maybe low 80s occupancy-wise when we acquired it. But we went in, we put in a lot of energy improvements as far as new HVAC units that are more efficient, insulation. We rebranded the building. We built an electronic message center that we sold advertising on and just used it as a means to advertise the building. And just kind of breathed some new life into it and communicated and really tried to optimize every facet of it and take care of the tenants. So we owned the building for 3 years and ended up selling it to a group that had some hot 1031 exchange money and paid quite a bit of money for the building. And everything that we do, Raj, we do it for the long term. So every building asset we buy, we plan on holding it for at least 10 years. But there's an exception to every rule, as you know. And so we made a decision to sell it after owning it for about 3 years or so.
There's a couple of things here I'd really like to expand on. So one, you mentioned off market. Can you share how that deal came across your desk, or maybe if you can't share details, just high level?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's another thing I love about real estate because, we have hundreds of tenants. So we get to see, hundreds of different types of businesses and ownership and, who does it right, who doesn't do it right. And you learn about so many different types of businesses that you normally wouldn't be able to. So the way the Three Flags deal happened was a friend of mine who's a broker. He came to me one day. He said, "John, I have an idea. It's a little bit crazy, some family dynamics, but I want to at least put it in front of you." And, it's not too dissimilar from how most of our acquisitions happen to happen. Usually they're off-market deals. Typically, when they're listed, broker's objective is to drive the price up as high as you can. There's a lot of competition. So we very rarely will we purchase a property that's listed, mainly because we like value add. We like to go in and we like to add value. We typically don't buy a building that is, turnkey, ready to go, because we don't see the returns there. So it's just kind of typical off-market, crazy idea kind of way it happened.
So primarily the broker relationship, right?
Yes.
That brought the deal to you. When you mentioned the communication with the previous ownership and the existing tenants, I'm assuming you were alluding to kind of like poor customer service. Is that accurate to say?
Yeah, that's accurate. It's funny, and I'm sure you see this in your business too, Raj. You got to answer your phone. Got to answer your phone. You've got to respond to emails quickly. And it seems so simple, yet it's very hard for some people to do. And that's very important to us. And I think, as simple as it sounds, that was one of the reasons why we were able to do so well with it, just because of the communication. And that shows that, hey, the ownership cares. We did have an on-site manager who was phenomenal, and she's actually still with the company. She runs our property management department right now. When we sold that building, that was the number one requirement, is that she comes with us. She's not staying.
That really, I'm sure, speaks highly to her skill level. The communication piece is, I think, relatively easy to do, but so many people miss it. We see it all the time in the apartment space. You see it in retail, office, industrial as well, I'm sure. I feel like, for whatever reason, that communication piece, when it's missed, is the number one reason why you might lose a tenant. There are other factors as well, but if you're not willing to take care of a maintenance request in a timely manner, or at least respond to it. If you're not willing to get back to a tenant on a question about the lease or something along those lines, it really creates or helps to develop a poor landlord-tenant relationship. Aside from communication, what do you guys like to do, or what did you do at Three Flags to improve that landlord-tenant relationship, and also maybe incentivize some of the tenants to move in or sign lease extensions, things along those lines?
Yeah. So a couple things. One is, whenever we buy a property, ultimately we want to raise rents. But you can't go in and you can't do nothing and expect tenants to pay more in rent. So the first thing we do is, in addition to kind of your energy improvements, your appearance of the exterior, the building improvements, we want to do physical cosmetic improvements to demonstrate that, hey, we're new, we care, and put in those improvements, before you make that ask from your tenant. So the physical improvements and the noticeable improvements are very important to us.
And the physical improvements there were very noticeable. One thing I really liked was with the signage. It was all consistent. A very minor pet peeve of mine is when I drive by a retail center and you see all sorts of different signage, different colors, just different formats, different materials being used. Was that a conscious decision to have the same type of signage for each tenant there at Three Flags?
Yes. Yeah. So that's one of the first things we did. That this particular building had some very dated, tenant signs on the face of all the retail spaces. They were like green and red and ivy looking, and just they were actually stained glass. So back in the 70s, 80s, they were beautiful, but they're not today. So we went in and streamlined the signage. I have a little bit of OCD in myself, so seeing consistency and clean lines is important to me.
It makes it look, maybe this is the wrong term, but it makes it look classy. It makes it look really good.
Yep. Curb appeal's big.
Yeah, right. With the eventual buyer, the group that you sold the property to, my understanding is they weren't able to run it as well as you. Do you have any insight as to why that might have been, or any idea?
This building's probably a perfect case study because it was mismanaged when we bought it. It was very well managed, a turnkey operation when we sold it about 3 years later. And the company that purchased the property had some hot 1031 money, and they were more concerned with not paying the tax than running the property well. I think within 6 months of the new group purchasing the property, the occupancy dropped from maybe the mid-90s to probably about 80%. And the reason why just comes down to what we've been talking about. You have to answer your phone, your emails, and you have to care. And they did not have on-site management. They did not answer their phones, and they even had situations where the power was turned off because they didn't pay their bills. Long story short, they ended up taking a pretty massive loss on it, although we actually tried to buy it back. We were outbid by another group who owns it today. But just an interesting case study for good management. Good management and bad management.
Yeah, that really truly highlights the difference there. I think it would have been really cool if you guys bought it back.
Yeah, we wanted to.
With the second and third floor being office there, would you think about that acquisition differently? Or when you were trying to buy it back, did you think about that differently versus when you bought it? Because you bought it pre-COVID. I'm assuming it traded again post or during COVID.
Yeah, so the office environment definitely did change within those few years. I probably wouldn't have thought about it any differently because we're so familiar with the property and the tenants, and we had a handful of dentists and I think a doctor in the second and third floors, so some stability there. And we had a lot of small businesses, a lot of small offices. So we've noticed a lot of people, during COVID and post-COVID, just they kind of made a decision that they were sick of officing in their basements with the kids screaming above them, and they needed a small professional space and a good good building. So we did have a lot of small tenants that probably wouldn't have affected my decision very much.
Got it. It's interesting that you mentioned dentists and things along those lines, because my thought for office, going forward is, I think everyone's going to want a physical presence of some sort, but when you think about a dentist or some other user that literally cannot work from home, I see very little risk there, and maybe there's mispricing on assets that maybe have those types of tenants in place. What are your thoughts on office going forward, if you have any that you can share? Do you think we're going to see tons of deals and mispricing, or are seeing tons of deals and mispricing to where people are overestimating the risk involved with office products, or just what are your general thoughts?
Yeah, so we have a handful of office buildings. So we kind of went through COVID with most of these and post-COVID and learned a lot along the way. But a lot of the office buildings we have are kind of your lofty, techie, creative type of environments that people want to be in. So you have to figure out how to differentiate yourselves and your building from everybody else, because, as companies have less need for square footage. We call it a flight to quality. So people are looking for smaller spaces that are nicer, and they're willing to pay more typically per square foot for the niceness and for the level of finish. They just don't need as much square footage. So from the landlord's perspective, you're going to have more tenants in smaller spaces that are nicer. So from a tenant improvement perspective, it can be costly from the landlord unless you're able to shuffle some of that tenant improvement burden to the tenant. But we've been able to do fairly well with our office buildings. We have one where the occupancy dipped a little bit, and in trying to think outside of the box, we decided to convert about 20% of the building to a co-working space with a company that sure most people have heard of, Regis. To try to drive, a little bit more traffic to the building, the right kind of traffic to the building, and really optimize the square footage of vacancy that you have.
That's a great idea, and I appreciate you sharing that, because I feel like a lot of the headlines are a little removed from reality. A lot of the headlines are doom and gloom for office, but anecdotally, any conversation I have, and I'm sure that you have, the reality isn't so bad, unless you're in specific submarkets where downtown, for example, that's maybe getting hit a little harder. So most of your office is suburban, correct?
Correct. Yeah, we do have we have one office building in the city on the hill. It's called the Fair Mercantile Building. But everything, is pretty suburban.
And the hill is unique for the city when it comes to office, correct? Because my understanding on that neighborhood is that it's a little more stable. There's a little bit of growth, and it doesn't feel like you're in the city when you're in the hill. Would that be accurate to say?
Yeah, you're spot on. I love the hill. So for those of you who don't know what the hill is, it's kind of the Italian neighborhood area in South St. Louis. And very unique. It's very safe. People tend to care more. And the building that we have on the hill is actually the largest office building on the hill. It's about 70,000 square feet. And it's just one of those great, safe, walkable, community-type neighborhoods.
70,000 square feet is a pretty big building. So I would be curious to hear the story on that one. We won't go into as much detail as Three Flags, but high level, was that another value add type of deal?
Yeah, it was. So that building is a story. Not as good of a story, or as long as a story, I should say, as Three Flags. But we purchased that building about 7 years ago. And there was a major tenant in the building, an anchor tenant, who had about 40% of the building. Long story short, she vacated about a year, maybe 6 months to a year after buying the building. And she vacated because she ended up committing bank fraud with a local bank and falsifying invoices and so forth. So, when we bought the building, it was humming like crazy, 100% occupied, lost a 40% tenant, and we spent the next few years climbing back out of it. And tell you real quick what we did to climb back out of it. We put in some more improvements. We marketed the building heavily, and we were willing to spend the dollars that it took to bring in the quality tenants that we wanted in that building, of which, the major tenant was not, come to find out. So we also do a lot of things like, solar panels, on our full service lease office buildings where the savings from the panels directly flow into your expenses. And, so we put a new roof on it, put 100 kWs of solar panels on it to save money, and really just tried to do the right thing and not skimp on doing it. And fast forwarding to today, it's probably one of our best performing buildings. And even though we had to invest a lot of money back into it, it's far less than what the buildings were today, and it's 100% occupied with a waiting list right now.
That's awesome. The solar panels, have you seen a lot of success with that? I've kind of toyed around with the idea here and there on certain assets, but I've just never gotten past what I perceive to be the risk of, will they actually perform as advertised? So it sounds like you've had success with the solar panels.
Yes. So I love solar panels. We've solared probably 4 or 5 buildings, and they work very well on, office buildings with a big flat roof. You can angle the panels whatever direction you have. Sometimes it's a challenge where, if it's a taller building with a smaller roof, do the economics make sense to put panels up there because your footprint's smaller? But for your full service office buildings where, you, the landlord, pay the electric bill, it's a direct savings. And we've monitored the performance, and the return really makes sense. And the payback period is around 7-8 years. So if you're planning on holding a building for the long run, 10 years or so, they really make sense because they're an instant savings on your electric bill. And if you put a cap rate on that savings, the return on that investment far outweighs the actual dollars you spent on the panels.
And is there a lot of maintenance involved from the landlord's perspective?
No, very little. In fact, when the panels do need maintenance or a panel's down, we're plugged into the solar panel company. So they actually call us when there's an issue and schedule it to be fixed and coordinate with property management. So it's a very light lift in terms of maintenance. And that's a great example of, ways that you can add value to a property without, aside from the cosmetics, the things you don't see sometimes are equally as important as the things you can see. For example, we have, a few late 70s, early 80s office buildings that are very inefficient. And when I say inefficient, I mean, typically your highest electric bill is peak summer, AC's cranking, you're drawing a lot of juice. Some of these buildings, they have these big dinosaur electric boiler systems in them. So we've noticed that they consume a lot more power in the winter than in the summer. And a lot of the buildings like, Creve Coeur, Maryland Heights, Chesterfield, they were built as all electric. So some of these things don't even have gas run to them. So what we've been able to do is we tear out the old dinosaur boiler that's electric. We bring gas to the building, and we put in a tankless, staged commercial boiler system so that, typically if you can imagine, what a tankless hot water heater looks like in your house, pretty much the same thing, just a little bit more sophisticated and bigger. And, typically you have 2 or 3 of these water heaters in series, in your panel room. And let's say the temperature outside is 40 degrees, only one's going to turn on. When it's 20 degrees, 2 are going to fire. And, when it's 2 degrees this coming weekend, you may have all 3 working. So we've been able to reduce our electric expenses or our energy total expenses during the winter by 60 to 70% by doing this. And that's a way you can add value that's a permanent add. It instantly changes the economics of a property. Tenants can't see it. Maybe they can feel it a little bit with maybe the heat's a little bit more balanced or the AC is more balanced. But, the economic kind of energy improvements are just as important as the ones you can see.
Thanks for sharing. Those are great ideas and tips. When you are thinking about the boiler, for example, how are you running the numbers? Is it just a function of the savings on the bills versus your upfront cost, and what, when you apply a cap rate to that savings, what kind of value you're adding. And if that's the case, do you have a formula, or is it just kind of case by case?
The solar is very easy. It's easy to calculate, pro formas based on, your cost for electric and how much electric you consume. And you have the historicals of, your last 12, 24 months of Ameren bills that you can grab data from. With the boiler systems, it's a little bit different. The first one we did was just, we did some kind of back of the napkin math just to make sure we thought it would be a good investment. But it really doesn't cost as much to do as you would think. So the first one we did, we just decided we're going to try it because the cost wasn't, as substantial as we thought it would have been. And it worked well. We were able to track it. We decided, well, heck, we're going to do it again. So that was more of a trial and error kind of approach rather than a methodical pro forma approach like the panels.
And sometimes that's what you have to do because
Yep.
the numbers aren't always available.
That's right. You go with your gut.
Yeah. I'm going to switch gears a little bit here. We mentioned and briefly touched on you flying, being a pilot. How did that become a hobby, and what impact has it had on your life?
Yeah, man. So always wanted to fly when I was a little kid. I always had, your model airplanes that were remote controlled. And I remember, when I was probably in second or third grade, just driving down the highway and saw this little plane flying in the sky. And I was riding with my dad. And I said, Dad, what is that thing? He said, well, it's a model plane. And I'd never seen one before. And from that point forward, I always had model planes. I was always playing around with them and the engines and so forth. And I always wanted to fly. When I was in high school and college and had to study, a lot of times I would just park at the airport, watch airplanes and learn about them. And, once in a while I'd get a little bit nosy and I'd pop in the hangar and talk to pilots and meet people. And I always knew I wanted to fly. So when I was at college, I just decided to go for it. So I went to St. Louis University. I wasn't part of their Parks College aviation program, and I was a business major. So I just kind of did it on my own and found a flight instructor and learned how to fly at Downtown Airport, which is the Parks College airport, about 22 years ago. And got my private pilot's license. And then kind of along the way, got my instrument ratings. You can fly through clouds and weather without visual reference to what's outside. You have to fly the plane solely by looking at your panel and your instruments. And I got my commercial rating along the way. And it's just been very cool to do. It's kind of your ultimate freedom to be able to go to the airport, get in a plane, and fly anywhere you want to. And, it's also been, just to translate it to real estate a little bit, when you're flying an airplane, you always have to stay ahead of the plane. So even before you take off, you have to plan your flight. You have to look at the weather, your departure, your destination. Will there be icing? What do the winds look like? What's the best altitude to fly at? Because winds are, faster and slower at different altitudes. So, from the planning perspective, you always want to stay ahead of your airplane. And then when you're in the air, you have to anticipate the conditions where you're landing at your destination. And you want to have your frequencies set before you need them. And you always want to think ahead. So translating that to real estate, you always want to think ahead. You always want to think about not just, this year, but what's your 5-year plan? What's your 10-year plan? What do you think this building, if we purchased it, could do over the long term, not just, the next 2 years when interest rates are very low? Can it sustain, higher debt service or lower debt service? Just stress test it. So aviation for me has been great for a lot of reasons. And I fly for this group called Angel Flight. So we transport patients from point A to point B. It's a lot of small town, more rural pickups, going up to bigger airports, Mayo Clinic, and so forth. And my youngest patient was 6 months old, and my oldest patient was probably mid-80s. So you get to, like real estate, you get to touch a lot of different businesses and learn about different ways of operating businesses. Same thing with this. I mean, you meet so many different people with so many different needs that it's just a good reality check. And it's a way to kind of combine my passion for aviation with giving back a little bit.
Thanks for sharing. I never would have thought that there were similarities between aviation and real estate, but there you go.
Yep.
We like to end the show with what we call a hole-in-one, which would just be your greatest piece of advice for someone that they can implement today, either their life or business. You've given us a lot of great advice, but if you have anything else left in the tank, we'd love to hear it.
I think the number one would be to be patient. And it's hard for me to be patient. It's hard for a lot of people to be patient, but especially in real estate, right now is a great example. We're in a time when it's very hard to get started in real estate. There's not a lot of real opportunity. It's not the best time to acquire real estate because of interest rate, because of seller expectations, for a lot of different reasons. So now, for me, is a time to be very patient. 2 years ago, we were very aggressive. We did a lot of 1031 exchanges, and we just re-leveraged and continued to build a portfolio. But patience always pays. And, one thing about real estate is it's a game of patience. It's not an overnight thing. You have to build it slowly. You have to learn how to raise capital, and you have to learn how to strike when the iron's hot, but not be greedy. And so I think patience would be really the biggest one.
That's a great piece of advice. And I've been trying my best to be patient over the last, call it 16 months or so. But it does get challenging at times. So I appreciate the reminder, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners do as well. Where can people learn more about you or your company?
Yeah, so name of the company is Skyline Commercial Real Estate. The website is skylinemore.com or tourskyline.com. And I'm always available. And really, I think what we're looking for right now is just to continue to build investor relationships so that when things do make sense, which probably isn't too far off from today, hopefully, that we just continue to facilitate the growth and help people diversify outside of the stock market.
John, thanks for your time. Really appreciate it.
You got it. Great to be here. Thanks, Raj.